What is up, guys? So for this video, I cannot wait to discuss and analyze the absolutely incredible third episode of Season 4 of Better Call Saul entitled Something Beautiful. This was a fast-paced and action-packed episode to say the least that at the same time really drove the plot forward and also provided us with a number of Breaking Bad character cameos as well. So without further delay, let's jump right into this review for episode 3. Okay, so right off the bat, this had to be my favorite episode of the season so far for many reasons, including the fact that this episode really took the storyline of Better Call Saul to the next level in regards to its overlap with the plot of Breaking Bad. This fact was of course epitomized by the cold opening scene of this episode, which from a thematic point of view, felt like it was taken right out of the plot of Breaking Bad. In this opening scene, we saw Victor and Tyrus enact Gus Fring's plan to stage Arturo's death in a manner in which it looked like he was killed by a rival criminal syndicate. However, in a shocking twist, we then saw that Nacho had also accompanied Victor and Tyrus to this scene as well, and was then shot twice by Victor as part of this deception in order to make the death of Arturo by a rival criminal syndicate truly look realistic, which as a result ended up taking Nacho to within an inch of his life. This intense and dramatic opening scene of Nacho being used as a pawn in Gus Fring's plan against the cartel would end up encompassing the majority of the plot of this episode and would also truly encapsulate Nacho reaping all of the consequences of his actions against Hector and the cartel. Following this cold opening scene, the first scene in Act 1 of this episode opened with the scene of Jimmy and Mike at Loyola's diner, where Jimmy discussed to Mike the details of his allegedly fail-proof easy money plan to steal the Hummel figurine he saw during his job interview at Neff Copiers. However, while Mike had no qualms about the validity of this plan, he nonetheless rejected this job offer from Jimmy. With this being stated, one does wonder why Mike decided to turn down this job offer from Jimmy in this episode, following doing many jobs for Jimmy in the past. In my opinion, I think one possible explanation for this plot could be that Mike did not want to potentially jeopardize his new employment for Gus Fring by doing this side job for Jimmy. However, I think a more likely explanation for Mike's rejection of this job offer had to do with Jimmy's demeanor in this scene. In summary, I think Jimmy's curt personality and off-the-cuff behavior gave Mike some hesitation about doing this job at this point in time, which was then put over the top following Jimmy's dismissive response to Mike's condolences about Chuck. Following Mike rejecting this job offer, this scene then culminated with Jimmy leaving the diner and calling the veterinarian Dr. Caldera in order to inquire about getting another individual to do the job that Mike turned down. As a side note, I really enjoyed seeing the Breaking Bad character Fran, the waiter at Loyola's diner, make another appearance in the plot of Better Call Saul in this scene, which really ended up being a precursor to the Breaking Bad characters who would appear in the plot of Better Call Saul for the first time in this episode. Additionally, in this scene, it should be noted that part of Jimmy's plan following stealing this figurine included sending Price to Dallas to an expo in order to sell it, so I really hope this line of dialogue in this episode was in fact a subtle hint that we will see Price in some capacity in this plot this season. Following this first scene in Act 1, Scene 2 of Act 1 then took us back to Nacho bleeding out in the desert, where it was revealed that he had called the cousins to come get him. Following the cousins picking up Nacho, we then saw Marco Salamanca ask Nacho who did this to him, which Nacho seemingly, according to Gus Fring's plan, provided Marco with some false information. This scene was then followed by Leonel Salamanca setting Arturo's car on fire to cover up the evidence of this staged hit. While this was a pretty brutal scene to watch, where you could really see all of Nacho's pain and suffering in full force, as we all know from the plot of this episode, this was truly only the beginning of Nacho's misery. Following the conclusion of Act 1, Act 2 of this episode then opened with the scene of Kim returning to work at Mesa Verde, which really displayed the clear and stark contrast between the two main overarching plots of Better Call Saul, following the previous scene of Nacho and the cousins at the end of Act 1. While the scene of Kim was primarily a plot development scene, this scene nonetheless seemingly provided us with some key details regarding Kim's emotional state, when we saw a rather introspective Kim look at all of the Mesa Verde bank models. While the scene was somewhat ambiguous, I think the scene was meant to display Kim possibly questioning her line of work when thinking about all of the work that was ahead for her in the Mesa Verde bank expansion project that would be going on during the same time as all of the personal issues in her life. These emotions that Kim exuded in this scene would of course come into play at the end of this episode. Following the scene, the second scene in Act 2 then picked up with Jimmy at Dr. Caldera's office, where we saw Jimmy inquire about getting a man from Dr. Caldera in order to perform the job Mike did not want. Following Jimmy successfully convincing a new man to do this job, this scene then took a very interesting turn when Leonel Salamanca very literally brushed by Jimmy McGill and walked into Dr. Caldera's office, where it was implied that he wanted to see Dr. Caldera in order to treat Nacho Nacho's bullet wounds. What was in fact so attention-grabbing about this scene was the fact that we saw another instance of the creators of Better Call Saul utilizing this literary device of a brush-by in order to have Jimmy briefly appear in the plot of the cartel, which in my opinion also raises the question of will this literary device be used to potentially bring Walter White or Jesse Pinkman into the plot of Better Call Saul at some point in time as well. Following the conclusion of Act 2, Act 3 of this episode then opened with a scene of Dr. Caldera seeing the bullet-ridden Nacho in the back of the cousin's truck, which then led to Dr. Caldera treating Nacho's wounds in the back of a Jiffy Lube. While this scene was in the end a plot development scene where it was revealed that Nacho would in fact survive, this scene was still nonetheless one of the most intense and dramatic scenes of the season so far. Furthermore, in my opinion, I think the reemergence of Dr. Caldera in the plot of Better Call Saul in this episode truly epitomized how his character appears to be the vessel by which the creators of Better Call Saul will be able to organically bring many characters from the plot of Breaking Bad into the world of Better Call Saul, like we saw occur in the next scene. Following this scene, the second scene in Act 3 then cut to the man Jimmy hired to steal the Hummel figurine at Neff Copiers, which was revealed to be Ira, the owner of Vamonos Pest, who we first met in the plot of Breaking Bad in Season 5, in the episode entitled Hazard Pay. While this scene culminated during the first scene of Act 4 with the successful stealing of this Hummel figurine, following the navigation through the unexpectedness of the owner of Neff Copiers, Mr. Neff, being forced to sleep at Neff Copiers due to the fact that his wife got mad at him and kicked him out of the house for the insinuations that came with buying a vacuum as a gift, which was some absolutely amazing writing in my opinion. This scene, more importantly, also displayed another critical piece of Saul Goodman's backstory, where it was revealed how Saul first met Ira prior to Breaking Bad, which as a result seems to have set up Vamonos Pest to be an integral part of the plot of Better Call Saul before the conclusion of the series, who, as we all know from the plot of Season 5 of Breaking Bad in the episode entitled Hazard Pay, had been legally represented by Saul Goodman for 5 years. Following this scene, the second scene in Act 4 then opened with the scene of Gus speaking with Juan Bolsa about the fact that the Salamancas had been hit by a rival criminal syndicate. During this conversation, we heard Juan Bolsa state that the cartel will stop running their product across the border as it looks like someone is out to disrupt the Salamancas. This then led Juan Bolsa to tell Gus to find a local supplier in the US in order to supply their dealers during this hiatus. With these plot details being stated, while I will be very curious to see who this local supplier for Gus will end up being, this scene also provided us with another glimpse into Gus Fring's detailed, calculated, and methodical revenge against the cartel, where through staging Arturo's death, Gus was able to effectively manipulate Juan Bolsa and the cartel in the exact manner that he intended. Following this phone call, this scene would of course then be followed by what might have been the biggest surprise of the 4th season so far, when it was revealed that during this phone call with Juan Bolsa, Gus Fring had been on his way to meet with none other than Gail Bedecker. Interestingly, if we look at the dialogue of Season 3 of Breaking Bad in the episode entitled Sunset, it appears that this scene in the 3rd episode of Season 4 of Better Call Saul took place at the University of Colorado during the period of time Gail was pursuing his doctorate. With this being said, in regards to the plot of this episode, it was revealed that Gus met with Gail in this scene in order to see Gail's findings regarding the purity of a variety of meth samples, seemingly as part of the process of finding a local meth supplier for the cartel, which Gail reported to Gus were all of a subpar quality. This then led Gail to enthusiastically offer up his own services for Gus Fring in order to produce a better quality meth, which was of course met with dismissal from Gus Fring, who stated that he could not yet allow this, and also stated to Gail, quote, "You were meant for better things." This dialogue was of course a subtle reference to the plot that would eventually transpire over the course of Breaking Bad, and with all these plot details being stated, based on the dialogue of Breaking Bad, it does appear that Gail could in fact eventually become an integral part of the plot of Better Call Saul. Following this scene, the last scene of this episode in Act 4 then culminated with a compelling scene of Jimmy and Kim at Kim's apartment, where we saw Kim tell Jimmy about the details of Chuck's estate meeting, including the details of Chuck's will, which Jimmy did not appear to be upset about. In addition to this, Kim also told Jimmy about the letter Chuck wrote to him as well. With this being said, what ended up making this scene so compelling was the vastly different reactions of Jimmy and Kim following Jimmy reading Chuck's letter out loud. During this scene, we saw that Jimmy seemed to show no emotion whatsoever when reading this outwardly heartfelt letter by Chuck, compared to Kim, who broke down in tears. With this in mind, as stated previously, I think Kim's emotional reaction in this scene stemmed from her worry about Jimmy's lack of emotion following the death of Chuck, which I think has caused Kim to think that something drastic has changed about Jimmy's personality following his brother's death. With this being said, as I have stated in many of my previous videos, it is truly amazing if you go back and watch the scenes of Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad and see just how self-centered, emotionally callous, and truly unrecognizable a person Saul is compared to the person Kim is currently in a relationship with. So, taking this into consideration, I think this inevitable change in Jimmy's personality is seemingly going to be the key driving force in the ending of this relationship, and I'll be very curious to see if we really begin to see a precipitous decline in this relationship start to take place in the coming episodes. So with all of these plot details from the third episode of Season 4 of Better Call Saul being stated, I thought this was a fast-paced and undeniably thrilling episode of Better Call Saul, which also contains some absolutely incredible writing that managed to mix the dark elements that were present in this episode with a tremendous amount of well-crafted humor as well. And as a result, all of this truly made this episode without a doubt my favorite of this season so far, which I think has definitely set up Season 4 to be the most thrilling and exciting season of Better Call Saul. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any new videos about the 4th season of Better Call Saul. As always, my name is Anton Jackson. Thanks again for watching.